First off, thanks for inviting me to have me here today. And it's interesting. On the first day, both Laurie Daniels and Don Gayton spoke, and they're colleagues of mine that I've known for years. And their presentations were great, set me up to go. And as we went along, and when you present later in a conference, it's like, man, yeah, that fits in, and you start to, I think Marty Williams introduced us the other day to the term Numa, which means thunder in the Ktunaxa language. And I said, man, people are stealing my Numa. But it's actually, I think they're reinforcing it. And it's a lot of the Numa that I want to present. I want to show you a bit what our program is about and what we do, but also very similar to what I was introduced to and what we saw today from Brian Harvey's presentation and Michael Minoz's is lots of mine are those same biased anecdotal observations. I'm an old time fire guy, and I've seen quite a few fires in my time, and I'm noticing different things on the land base as well. So I want to talk a bit about those. So let's jump right into it. So I'm not sure if I can hide this. There we go. We were already introduced to basically the concept of dendrochronology and looking at fire scarring on the trees. And that's some of the basis of what we use, but it also really identifies with this tree that was cut just south of where I live. I live in Fairmont Hot Springs, found on the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa Nation. And if we look here, the center pith is at 1600, and we had fire return intervals about every 28 years until 1907. Then we go almost 100 years without a fire return. So we've missed 4 fires, 4 landscape fires that were of the severity enough that would scar this tree. If only we could go back to 1907 and see what did the landscape look like at that time. Well, what do you know? I've got a photo from just a couple kilometers north of my place here from 1906. And we can see the bottom of Lake Windermere and the landscape around it. Now, an ER team leader, Randy Harris, who's probably on the call today, he ended up getting a copy of this photo and said, I'm gonna go there and do a retake on it. So here's his retake, and it shows the change that's occurred on the land base. You take 4 fire return intervals out of the system, and this is what you're going to end up with. Now, if I go a little further south, and I'm just a little bit further south, at the top of my screen is around Canal Flats, which is about 30 kilometers south of me now. You can see that same forest cover presenting itself in our valley bottom. But what this picture is, there's lots going on here. This is from 2017, and we had a wildfire at what's called Island Pond, and you can see the island in the middle of the pond. We had a wildfire go here, and on the east side of the highway, the fire picked up and took off. It was a stand replacing fire, and you can see the high severity impacts of it here, and it ended up racing all the way up the hill. There was a cut block just to the east of it, and it didn't burn much in the cut block, a little bit, but mostly got into the heavy timber and kept moving east. On the west side of the highway, where some ecosystem restoration projects had been done on private land. It wasn't my program that did this, but they actually did quite a nice job of it. What you can see is a bit of a red stripe going through here, and that's retardant that we drop from air tankers. But just because of the open canopy, we were able to have the retardant hit the ground. We were very successful at limiting the spread of this wildfire. On the other side of the highway, you can see retardant up into the canopy, and really it didn't have much of a hope on creating much of a barrier there. So even just for the fire suppression piece of this, we had a lot more success because of the proactive management that have been done here. And some folks might say, well, wouldn't this have been a natural wildfire? We could have, maybe used this as an opportunity to put fire on that piece. And yet, under some circumstances, you could have. But this was 2017, and we are going to talk a little bit more about it. Our indices at this time, so our fire weather indices, were completely off the charts. They were the driest on history by double. And I'm going to show some evidence of that. Now, the one quick discussion I want to have here, though, and this ties into a bit of what Michael was talking about 2 presentations before this, and talking about organics in the soil and managing runoff. Let's quickly look at Island Pond. It's an island in a pond. This is our driest year ever by double. We've got lots of water down in that pond right now. Now, I'm going to go to the next slide, and we're going to look at it. In 2012, Island Pond had just about dried up. So much so I had to stop and take a picture of it. 2012 wasn't a dry year, but there hadn't been logging done upslope. The ER work hadn't been done across from it. And that moisture was not making it downslope. It was all being intercepted, likely by the amount of trees on the slope. Now, it's, again, this is anecdotal evidence. If we look to 2017, as dry as it gets, we've got all kinds of water. Now, I think the one piece is missing is that because of the disturbance that's happened on the land base, both through the wildfire, the harvesting, the ER work that's happened, we haven't seen the substantial response from our understory yet that would be managing and contributing to that surface flow of water down slope, would be putting those organics in the amount of roots in our grasses and bunch grasses in this area, that would also be moderating the flow of the water. And also, I think we're not seeing the dispersed melt that Michael had also alluded to. So our water is all coming down at the same time. But very interesting, in the back corner of this area here, there's actually 2 cabins that were probably built, I'm going to guess, around 1920s. And they're currently, in this picture, the driest on record. Both those cabins are partially underwater. So ecosystem restoration is a provincial program, and we operate within either a regional or district basis. So in our north area, we have a collaborative group that government has initiated, well, most times government has initiated, to cause a group of managers and interested parties, just like everyone on the call, to get together and work collaboratively to restore key ecosystems in this space. So here we have CERN BC in northern British Columbia. The Caribou Chilcotin has a restoration committee looking after that region. We have a very well advanced Rocky Mountain Trench ecosystem restoration program. And over in the Okanagan right now, the Okanagan Nation Alliance has taken the lead on bringing our parties together, and I'm enjoying the working relationship we've embarked on with them. In other districts that aren't covered by some of these groups, we still do have smaller programs going and champions in those districts that are carrying out projects more than a large-scale program at this time. Part of what we're doing is trying to understand what would fire ecology look like on our landscape. And the real simplistic way, and especially the presentation that we just watched with all the modeling available, this is more my speed, where I went through university when we still had crayons and pencil crayons, we had to color our maps. So we have some zonation in, this is a Rocky Mountain coverage. And basically, we've identified the yellow on here is private land, but the brown is our open range areas. The lighter green is what we call our open forests, and then the darker green are closed forest. And it's not our current condition of that landscape, it's what we call a desired future condition, where we're moving towards. And we have already put planning or treatment on 50,000 hectares in this part of the world. So there has been substantial investment and substantial thinking about it, incorporating risks and values and collaboratively trying to identify what's the next most important piece of land to be dealing with, what still needs maintenance, and collaboratively coming up with solutions. Oftentimes in our dry forests, there's the simple concepts, I suppose, of a suite of treatments where we're doing conventional harvesting, slashing and spacing, all objectives around getting to a targeted stem count per hectare or stems per acre or basal area driven. And also, when it's appropriate, using prescribed fire. So this is a picture of a prescribed fire we carried out near Kimberley on airport pasture just last year. One of a big piece that's come forward that's really has been a challenge, and we heard about it in some presentations in earlier days, is the invasive species that we're finding on the land base. And we're really challenged by when we put the prescribed fire on the land base or any of our treatments, we need to both manage for managing invasive species, but also managing invasive species so we can still carry out some of our activities that we think we need to do. So I had our invasive species specialist for the province put together a best management practices document that is species specific, but it also gives an overview on some of the principles for managing invasive species on the land base and things we should be turning our head to. And they came up with 3 principles that project managers must understand the density, distribution, biological characteristics of invasive plants present in their area. And it only makes sense to understand the biology of what you're trying to manage. Principle 2, the potential for invasive plants must be introduced into or spread throughout the area, must be minimized or eliminated through all phases of a prescribed burn project. And that actually comes right back to, if you think of the suite of treatments, we have to be managing them and coming up with a plan when we're still doing our prescription before we've cut a tree for harvesting, before we've done slashing, and understand what steps may have to be taken to manage those species, but also reduce our impact on spreading them. And 3, limiting the amount of resources available to invasive plants. And a lot of that comes back to understanding your biological characteristics at the top. Of course, monitoring is also very important. If you can believe it, this is the same site, North Cherry, plot number 2, in 2009, prior to doing work, and 2011, post doing work. And there's oftentimes dramatic impacts that we're making on those ecosystems. Now, monitoring is a big piece, and we had Evelyn Hamilton maybe on the call here as well, that she led a group of researchers that assisted our program, but also just the province in general, collecting data around monitoring on fire on the land base. Now, I've put up a link to a website where they have a couple reports up there, but also discuss that database. And I really appreciate the work and professionalism that Evelyn and her researchers brought forward to support us moving forward. When we think about our dry forest ecosystems, I've often had people say, you know what, we need to be doing uneven age management. And they have this elegant solution on how it works. When really, when we're in our dry forests, I can't even figure out how I would do uneven age management on this site. It is a mosaic of pieces. And I think Michael had some great shots of that diversity on the landscape, the heterogeneity that we're trying to aim for. And so here we have treed open range, open forest conditions, and then of course ingrowth and some of our managed forest. And I don't know that that's managed forest as much as it is, I suppose, a silviculture slum. But nevertheless, all of these are important features on the land base, and that mosaic is what makes it so biologically rich and diverse. Let's talk about some of the fire history and our management on the land base. And I think I heard one of my US counterparts talking about 2000, the year 2000 seemed to be a bit of a turning point as far as fire on our land base. And we saw the same thing in British Columbia. If we look from 1970 to 2000, the red lines are our wildfire burn area. That's how much was being burnt. Now that's hectares going up the side on the left side, of course. Now, what I put on for reference, this yellow line, is approximately the area that we harvest provincially in a year, about 190,000 hectares. So if we look from 1970 up to 2000, using that as the break point because we talked about it, 3 times in that 30 years do we have what I would call a bad fire year. We're burning even more than we harvest in a year. That's a lot of disturbance on the land base. Let's look the other direction. And if we just go to 2018, which is really an 18-year span, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and those last 2 are off the charts. But it shows that we're seeing that same increase. Also shown on this chart is purposeful burning that was being done on the land base that we recorded here. Habitat ecosystem restoration burning, but also slash burning for prep for fires and such. Now, it certainly curtailed off in 1995, 96, and there's a number of reasons for that. Both liability issues, smoke issues, but I think it was also a structural change within our own organization in that our fire management program moved out of what we called at the time the Forest Service. We were still very closely connected, but they took on a protection type role, and all of our fire folks moved over to that place. I better keep moving along here. I'm going to take too long. I have too many stories to tell. Of course, climate change is presenting some of that challenge. Now, this is a map that I just want to show quickly here. Is on the left is an area in Kamloops that shows their biogeoclimatic zones. And I just want folks to center on the yellow and the orange. The yellow being bunchgrass ecosystems and the orange being a ponderosa pine dominated ecosystem. Well, this is what the projection is for 2050. And you can see the amount of expansion that occurs. And it's not necessarily that the bunch grasses start migrating north at a rapid pace. It actually shows the stress that's going to be on those ecosystems. The projections are just a way to reflect the moisture and temperature changes that those parts of the land base will experience. Well, this projection is actually if we stopped emitting carbon today, or actually in 2009. Where this is the projection if we didn't. And you can see the amount of bunch grasses that now include a large fire from 2017, the Elephant Hill fire. I'm going to dive into a fire because there's a couple significant parts. In 2017, Assiniboine Provincial Park had a significant fire going on that the north half was looked after by Parks Canada, the south half was being addressed by BC Wildfire Service. And I was the incident commander on the first era of managing that fire. So this is fairly high elevation. It's not our dry forest, but it was during a time, again, of one of our driest on record weather conditions. And you can see this is me looking at what Parks Canada had to deal with, and this is what was marching my way. A fairly organized flame front and fairly active fire behavior. The fire we were looking at there is just on this yellow line. Basically, Parks Canada was looking after everything purple, and that's the fire perimeter, and I would start taking it on as it came into the yellow. Now, we had a lodge up here that we ended up having to evacuate and some trigger points. And I want to talk about 2 locations here that we're going to focus in on. One is up here. This is a holding point that we're trying to keep it from running up Surprise Creek and lopping over. If it did, it would move quickly towards this BC Parks core area where they have infrastructure and folks were there at the time. So I was managing that piece. But also this fire grew out here, wrapped around into the main highway corridor and started traveling up towards Vermilion Crossing through an area that was burnt in 2003. So this harkens back to Brian Harvey's discussion about reburns. So let's look at that really quick. So here I am up in that pass where I have to hold it from coming through here. We don't want the sparks coming over, and it is pressuring that other side fairly significantly. On the right, you can see what my alpine fuel conditions were up there. This should be lush grasses. And as I walked around, it was just crunching under my feet. And for someone with a fair amount of fire experience, I was standing there going, my RH is 8%. My temperature is about 40 degrees today, and I've got winds coming exactly the wrong way. And as I stood there, I went, you know, it just feels different right now. We're seeing climate change acting on me right now. And it was just such dry conditions. This is one of the tools we have. Now, this is a ponderosa pine. I used the wrong one, but I had it. So I just want to show you an example. Across the top, we have something that we call, as part of our Canadian fire weather system, the buildup index. And it basically says, how is weather building up those coarser fuels that would become available for combustion? And so we're talking about the duff layer and deeper down on the soils, but also our coarser stems and coarser fuels. Down the other side is our spread index. So that's more your fine fuels, but also wind plays into that. So on that given day, I was in around this neighborhood for my initial spread index. So you start looking across this line. Okay, so where is my buildup index right now? So our top category is 161 to 200. But our calculated buildup index that I was dealing with at this time was 470. So it was somewhere over here. So you can imagine how challenging that is. It's, again, things were different. Even the tools we had to tell us what fire behavior to expect were completely off the charts. If we go down into that highway corridor now, this is the 2003 burn. And you can see the remnants of the stand replacing fire that occurred, and there's a lot of stems left behind. But these were very mature trees, a lot of cone crop, and it dropped the seeds out of those cones. And we had a very thick, heavily stocked stand growing up behind it, 14 years old. So as the fire rolled out into this, all of those contributed as fuel. And as you can see, we had consumption of those 2003 killed standing stems, but also the understory. So the fire had come around this shoulder and came this way. And now, again, there isn't that seed source available. So is this part of the transition of walking this to more open range sites? It's just my biased anecdotal evidence. There's a few important guiding pieces that have come out in British Columbia recently. So in 2017, after this year, and unfortunately 2018, we are right back in the same thing, but we did a review of addressing a new normal, 21st disaster management in British Columbia, called the Abbott-Chapman report. And my two takeaways from that report were, it's a shared responsibility and we need to work collectively moving forward on this. And one of the main pieces was, we need more use of prescribed fire on our land base. And the province has taken actions to address that. The province of BC adopted UNDRIP in 2019. And all I can say is, thank goodness. If I have a partner that wants to work with me in ecosystem restoration that has 10,000 years plus of experience in that space, I'm all ears. That is great news. And all of my steering committees have lots of engagement prior to the province adopting this anyways. But an old growth review. There's been in 2020, a BC old growth review of how we're managing our old growth. I don't expect anybody to read what's underneath, but what it is they left space in that old growth review to say, if fire's excluded from some of our dry forests, it could be the worst thing that could happen to our old growth in those areas. We need to understand the fire ecology and where some of those old growth sites are at. So it does leave room for us to do some work in that area. And lastly, 2020, BC has brought out a Together for Wildlife strategy, and restoring habitat is a big part of our mandate as well. Now, if we just take a quick look on our land base, this is my second last slide here. There's lots going on. Right now, we have a large program, fuel management, wildfire risk reduction in the wildland urban interface around communities. We also have First Nations ecocultural restoration projects, but also doing wildfire risk reduction. We've got forest industry harvesting quite appropriately to appropriate stocking standards, and they are contributing partners and big players on our land base. Together for Wildlife Strategy is putting projects together on key ecosystems and key habitat portions. Rangeland management, invasive species management, I think folks are getting the picture here. BC Parks are players in our land management in this space, as is my ER program. We also have red listed ecosystems being identified, and our NGOs are also managing large private land holdings. I think the key part is it doesn't all have to be one thing, but the important thing is that we all get together, have dialogue, and it allows us to share, but also fly a bit in formation on how we move forward on the broader land base. And lastly, I think it's important to recognize the United Nations has declared 2021 to 2030 the decade of ecosystem restoration. And it's incumbent on all of us to do our part to manage our land base. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. That was great. We can take one short question if there's somebody that is just, I haven't had a chance to monitor. Let's see if, thanks to the shout out. Okay, to what extent does the proactive management, i.e. prescribed fire mechanical of the ecosystem restoration program consider fire behavior targets, for example, reduce intensity in future fires as opposed to forestry targets?
As opposed to forestry targets?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm reading comments as they come up too. Fire behavior is certainly a part of it. And I think, again, we are a suite of a whole bunch of things going on in the land base. And we have some models coming forward from our fire modeling group as they're working on the wildfire risk reduction piece and talking about fire intensities versus different fuel types. So I think it's an important piece. There's lots more work to do on that. Not sure if I'm giving much of an answer there for them. But.
I think, yeah, there's always more to do, right?
Yeah.
So, no, thank you for that. I'm sure people will reach out to you individually if they have more questions or, yeah, keep monitoring the chat as well.